Welcome to the Generosity Experience, the podcast from Neon One, where we explore how our communities show generosity, not just through money, but through relationships, time, and advocacy. I'm Tim Sarrantonio.
And I'm Sam Nyland. Together, we help nonprofit professionals connect more deeply with their communities, move supporters to more meaningful action, and simplify how generosity gets done.
Each conversation brings forward the voices and insights that are shaping the future of generosity, from strategy to systems and everything in between.
So pull up a chair. There's always room for one more in this conversation.
Hello, everyone, and officially welcome to the first episode of the Generosity Experience podcast. I'm your co-host, along with Sam Nyland. I'm going to take over the first pilot episode. That's kind of how we're doing things over here. And so each month we're going to have a few different segments. We're going to have some awesome interviews. So we have something with Rachel D'Souza coming up. But first and foremost, we're going to always kick things off every month with what we call the big number. And the big number helps set the tone for the month. It helps set the tone for what Sam is going to explore with a customer leader over at Neon One, as well as even help influence our hotline segment that you'll hear a bit later in the episode with Sam and myself. There is no one I would rather hear from when it comes to the big number than our own head of research, Abby Jarvis. Abby, welcome to the Generosity Experience.
Thank you. I'm excited to be in the first episode.
You are technically you're my first guest. Technically, in order of how we put the episodes together. Full disclosure, folks, because we're going to build in public. I already did record my episode with Rachel, but that's because Rachel also knows what the big number is, because it is the biggest number in many ways, Abby. So, folks, just so you get comfortable, every single month I'm going to ask Abby the same 3 questions. She gets to change the answers, though. So, Abby, question number 1 for the big number segment. What is the big number for June?
The big number for June is 96.9. So 96.9% of donors give less than $5,000 annually to nonprofits.
Okay. Question number 2. Why should people care about the big number?
People should care about this because it is an absolutely enormous percentage of donors. But this is the group of donors who are most rapidly or most frequently disengaging from nonprofits right now. So when we talk about dips in individual giving and people disengaging from supporting their favorite causes, these are the donors we're talking about. And it is the largest and most important group of donors.
Okay. And final question, and we're trying to keep these for about 5 minutes total, folks. So this is hard for Abby. I understand this. But what are 3 actions people can take around the big number?
The first is to actually put some real effort into building plans to reach these folks in a way that makes sense to them. Something that we know from a lot of the research we've done here at Neon One is that people support their favorite causes and their favorite nonprofits because of deep emotional and personal ties to those causes. Those emotional ties need to be strengthened and reinforced if you would like to build a sustainable donor base. The second, after you've acquired them, after you've gotten them involved, is to put a great deal of thought and care into how you retain them and keep them engaged. Donor retention rates have been falling for years. You're going to put a great deal of time and effort into getting these folks involved in your work. You need to be easy on yourself and your team by keeping them involved, but also be good to them, because the longer they stay involved, the more they tend to give over time. And the third thing I would say is really just to focus on building a balanced donor base. It's really easy when you are a fundraiser and you are really trying to hit your fundraising goals to seek out those donors who can write you the large checks, to seek out grants that can pay your bills. And those things are important and you shouldn't neglect those. However, if you over index on those activities, you will find yourself with a donor base that is made up of a very small group of people, and that is really risky for you. So it's a lot of work to build a thriving donor base. I don't want to downplay the effort and the strategy and the thought that needs to go into that. However, if you do that, you're setting yourself up to be a more sustainable organization in the long term and to by mitigating a lot of the risk inherent in losing some of those major donors.
I mean, that's some amazing advice. It also is going to pair very well with the interview that we have coming up with Rachel D'Souza next. So, Abby, I can't wait to hear what the big number is for July. But, folks, you're going to have to tune in for that. Hit that like and subscribe button. This is the terrible time that I have to say that type of thing. Abby, I want to thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you. I'll see you then.
Folks, we just heard about the big number, right? The 96.9% of people who are everyday givers. But part of the Generosity Experience podcast is to start to really drill into what that practically means. And we are kicking things off with one of my favorite people in the world, Rachel D'Souza. Rachel, in your own words, can you tell us a bit about who you are, what kind of drives you, what you're doing on an everyday basis for work?
Yeah, I can. Thanks for having me, Tim. My name is Rachel D'Souza. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently the founder and president of Gladiator Consulting, a boutique firm I founded about 10 years ago in St. Louis, Missouri, where I live. I also have the great honor of being on the Global Council for the Community-Centric Fundraising Movement. And when I'm not doing all of these work things, I am a very happy mama to my two kids, Cameron and Amelia. I am also an Enneagram 8 wing 7 and double Gemini. I am a Gemini Taurus. So now you know all the details, and hopefully that tells you everything about who I am as a person.
Because I had to ask, because you helped answer a little bit of my next question anyway, which is what do you do outside of work? So for people, ignorant white dudes like me, what does the last part actually mean in terms of how does that help influence your worldview?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I'll just say Geminis generally take on more than they can handle because we're out here trying to do it all for everyone. Mm-hmm. And Enneagram world, I am like the justice seeker, right? So I am always looking to right wrongs, if that tells you anything about the kind of work that I choose to do and what matters to me.
So let's actually unpack that a bit, because I want to get into kind of the bigger picture that connects to our big number. But, there's a lot of different people, a lot of different podcasts, in all honesty. But what I think that we're going to try to really do here is take a critical look at the underlying friction between generosity and technology. That's kind of my approach here. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to kind of get your general understanding of what is the state of the sector from your perspective on what we're going through right now, because that'll help us kind of unpack what do we do about that.
How much time do we have?
We're trying to keep these to 20, 30 minutes. So
yeah. So here's what I'll say. If we're talking about, let's just for ease, talk about the social sector in the United States. Mm-hmm. When I look at,
because you have a great talk about this, and you actually you've been presenting this. You even presented it at the Rooted and Rising virtual conference that Neon One helped produce.
Absolutely.
Recently. So maybe use your talk as a framing device. I think that.
Yeah. So here's what I'll say. We all understand the historical context of philanthropy, right? At least I hope we do. It's supposed to mean the love of humankind. And here in the United States, we tend to have made it a lot about money, wealth, and power, right? So when we think of philanthropists, most people who are generous or who give don't think of themselves as a philanthropist because they do not have wealth. They do not perceive themselves to be influential. But what they are is generous. And something that has happened, I would say in the last few years, and I believe the Generosity Commission report highlighted this in the fall of 2024, is that the world has changed and our relationships with each other have changed. And we've seen a drop in donors over the course of the last few years. And we've seen a drop in the number of volunteers. but we've still seen contributions rise, right? We've still seen volunteer hours increase. And so what that tells me is that while the pool of people, it feels like it's shrinking, we actually have people being more giving, more generous of their time and of their resources. And I think there's something to that. I think that part of sort of our human nature is to be connected to folks, to want to be in mutual relationship. And when we have those things, it makes it easier for us to be generous and to give of our resources.
Well, and that kind of leads into the big framing discussion point that I want to have, because folks, we're kind of gonna stumble into segments in my structure here. I think podcasts do help if you have a dedicated thing. So this is the bigger picture question, ultimately, Rachel, because we understand the context and the state of the sector in many ways, and I will link to even some other things in the show notes that may help with this deeper context, folks. So if you want to check out some of Rachel's work, that's going to be in the show notes for sure. But what I think was really fascinating is because at the recent Association of Fundraising Professionals conference in Seattle, in many ways, the birthplace of community-centric fundraising, at least one of the influences there.
Yeah.
Lot of things going on. And I'd love to hear, your general takeaways from even that conference, because a lot of times that is seen as, oh, well, that's where all the fundraisers go. We know that's the majority don't, but it still influences the conversation. And then even within that, we had a really fascinating dinner that I want to unpack a bit. But what happened around AFP this year that I think is showing you promise and hope?
Yeah, so I'll say a few things. First of all, our Community-Centric Fundraising Global Council was able to have a reunion for CCF fundraisers and acolytes in Seattle. And while that was not connected to AFPICON, they did extend our Global Council session at the conference to talk a little bit about what we've learned in this work over the course of the last 5 years. So first of all, partnership, right? Silo busting. That definitely gives me hope. At ICON, I would say the two biggest things that I heard, and I know you and I are going to be talking about this for months to come, are recurring gifts, monthly giving, gifts from smaller dollar donors who are giving more frequently, and figuring out how to use AI as a tool that informs and supports your fundraising efforts. There was a lot of curiosity. There was a lot of dialogue. There were a lot of unlikely partnerships. And it feels like the sector is sort of finally beginning to get a handle on the ways in which we've sort of shifted and changed over the course of the last decade. So I actually left ICON thinking, okay, we're having some new conversations. We're starting to think about things in a different way. And I am the biggest believer that when we give ourselves the opportunity to imagine, to reimagine, to be a little creative, we start to build things that are going to make our work just that much more fulfilling and sustainable for the organizations that we serve.
One of the things that I've been fascinated about, because I've been in the nonprofit sector since 2008, right? I got my start as a grant writer. I wasn't writing grants for very long, right? So there's always this kind of agility that came with it. And also this understanding, at least in practice, that like the opportunities are there, even if the resources aren't immediately evident.
Yeah.
And after that amount of time, and even then when I kind of stumbled into finding Neon in 2011, 2012 is really when I started really kind of getting into and understanding what my job was. A lot of it was rooted in what role technology can help move this along. But I think that you're flagging two really important, almost one part of the spectrum can almost be addressed with a mindset rooted in scarcity. What kind of, in my opinion, there's two main scarcity mindset applications that stem from the ultimate scarcity mindset. We say we have a scarcity mindset in this sector, right? But then we never grapple with what that practically might mean.
Or what it holds us back from accomplishing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so on my end, what I've witnessed is on the tech side, you have kind of this techno-solutionism, the deterministic view, almost a techno-deterministic view of life.
Sure.
That basically says, like, if you just automate the hard things, then it gets easy. Just
I wish
make it
that was
automated.
true.
It's not true.
It's not true at all.
And all it does is maybe automate the least, like the most tenuous connection that people can have, right? Which is a transactional element. When we think about this from a psychological standpoint, identity drives a lot of, even the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy talks about this, where it's like identity is the biggest driver of how people are. But then you have that opposite side that I would make an argument what community-centric fundraising has mainly critiqued, the paleo philanthropy, as I call it, which is that, like, you know, the board of directors is kind of like dictating what needs to be done and how we interact with the community. And if we change things, then we're going to lose the purity of what we're doing. And then that actually has disconnected you from things. So where's that path forward? Because we started to explore parts of that, maybe not named explicitly that way, but in a dinner that we had around the generosity report that Neon One released.
I have my copy.
Which she has for copy. So we're doing both video as well as audio podcast, folks. So if you're watching on video, you did see Rachel flash the Neon One generosity report. Yeah. But we had a really interesting dinner that ultimately was rooted in what exactly is generosity. And I'd love to kind of hear your takeaways coming out of that really fruitful discussion, because part of the vision here is that's a nice thing to have in that room, but what do we do, right? You can't just stay in the room. So where did you come? Because you came up with this beautiful phrase, and because you came up with it, I want you to own it, to kind of expand on it.
So, we had the honor of sharing this lovely meal while we were in Seattle together. And it was, Jeffersonian style. So we were all in one big dialogue together. And I think one of the questions that our moderator posed was, what is generosity? How would you describe generosity? And people around the table said it was, a willingness to give of what you have. And then the next question was, do we need, does there have to be a need, right, to qualify something as generosity? Are you giving to something? Are you giving selflessly? And so we were really, in this philosophical space. And I started thinking about where, community-centric fundraising and those principles lend themselves to this idea that we actually do live in a very generous country. We have lots of people who are regularly and consistently being generous of their resources. But what does that look like in transformational relationship? And so, yes, I think the thing that popped out of my mouth that night was this idea of reciprocal generosity. And so when we read the 10 principles of community-centric fundraising, we understand that fundraising is rooted in racial equity and social justice. We want organizations to be in mutual relationship and prioritize the community over its individual mission, and that can be really hard, I think, for fundraisers to grasp in the moment when they're in direct relationship with the donor. And what reciprocal generosity essentially means to me is that if we are going to seek transformational relationship with our donors, we can't just report to them an outcome of what a contribution did, right? We have to invite them to be on a journey together. And so how are we being generous with our donors, right? What kinds of experiences or opportunities are we providing our donors to be in relationship with each other, to be in relationship with our teams, to be in relationship with the community that they're seeking to impact, right? How do we create a space where everybody, right? Everybody has something to give. I don't care about wealth. I don't care about power. I don't care about privilege. I grew up in a solidly lower middle class household, and my parents were always making meals for church. My parents were always donating our clothes to the kids that were, coming up behind us. everybody has something to give. What is our opportunity as nonprofits, as the people that are shepherding philanthropy and generosity? What do we do to make it possible for everybody to be generous?
So that is such a perfect lead in to the next kind of segment that I'm trying to establish here, which is the fractals view.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've been heavily influenced by Emergent Strategy, the book.
Yes, we all worship at the altar of Adrienne Maree Brown. I have to say
it's
it.
so
We
good.
do.
It's so good.
So
And
good.
so they talk about fractals, and I'm seeing it obviously everywhere now, but in terms of like these little patterns that can kind of scale no matter the size, and how
Yeah.
I'm practically embracing that is little actions, little things, little types of generosity, as simple as I came back from the Aspen Institute's Trust and Practice, obsessed with like, okay, I'm going to make a meal for a neighbor, right? Like these little actions that rebuild trust, because trust cannot be surged. That's one of the best lines that came out of that. So the question I have for you is, what is a small habit, a decision, a thing that you do that kind of ends up making these big differences over time?
Yeah. So one thing I will say in response to what you shared is what always sticks with me is the revolution will not be televised. And so, right, like what does that mean, right? We're not going to see this huge sweeping change take place over the course of a 24-hour news cycle, right? The change that most of us seek, the justice that my Gemini heart seeks, right? It happens in the tiny things that we do every day, the habits we build, the way that we give each other permission to show up differently. And so for me, I think I've done a couple things over the last few years. One thing that's been really important to me is teaching my children how to be generous. And so, at one point, unfortunately, we live in a city and a community where there's an unhoused population. We started carrying like granola bars and water bottles in our car. And so anytime we were at a stoplight or an intersection and there was somebody, I would roll down my window and we'd hand them these snacks. And the thing that I've said to my kids forever is you always have the opportunity to be kind to somebody else, right? And so now like they'll come home with their own little stories of like, oh, so-and-so didn't have their lunch today and the school lunch sounded gross, so I shared my orange. And it's like, okay, like you understand that you always have an opportunity to be kind to someone else, right? For me, I love the idea of cooking meals. I love cooking. It is therapeutic. It is healing. I sometimes don't even eat the thing that I cook because the chopping is like what gives me joy. But have started to like invite people over for these meals because I'm cooking and need to feed people, right? And so we hang out with family, we hang out with our neighbors. We've dropped off meals to people who've injured themselves who live in our neighborhood. And for me, the idea of feeding and providing nourishment is like one way that I choose to be generous with like my gifts and talents.
So I definitely want to revisit the meal item too in what I'm going to force into a segment for sure about recipes. I basically want to gather recipes.
We're going to have a generosity exchange cookbook.
Exactly. That's kind of what that's
it's going to be a recipe swap. It's going to be a recipe swap.
I know.
It's going to be great.
I love it because I think we need to kind of create spaces for that. But before we enter that, I want to give you an opportunity because we're trying to keep these episodes relatively light, breezy, actionable as well. And so we've gotten a big picture, we've gotten a nice philosophy, we've gotten a very practical thing. Is there something I haven't asked you that you want to make sure we talk about?
Ooh, yeah. Bringing donors along on a generosity journey, I think.
How does that work in practice? Because I think we can hear this and the reality is that I think a lot of fundraisers, like I came up and I didn't have a background. I was a failed academic. And so they're learning from the internet. It's not like yes, there's professional certifications and stuff like that, but the vast majority of people can basically say, like, how did you end up on the island of misfit toys? So if we're learning through things, and it might say donor-centered fundraising from Penelope
Yeah.
Burke. Great book. It's a great book from a
it's a great
tactical
book
standpoint.
for sure.
And then there's the false dichotomy of like versus this and da 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 da. So how can somebody who's just coming up kind of like wade through that?
Yeah. So, one of the biggest decisions that I had to make in my professional career was releasing the idea of thinking in a binary, right? Many things can be true. And I've said this, forever, that community-centric fundraising and donor-centered fundraising they're not in opposition to each other, right?
Yeah.
There are really wonderful things about both of them. And when humans go hard on one thing, we tend to not do it very well, because that's just not the way the world works. And so I've seen folks sort of try to rush through the process of donor-centric fundraising, right? Which essentially tells us if we keep our donor happy and we're meeting their needs, we're going to raise more money, and we're going to raise more money longer over time, right? That's wonderful. And we've done that. In some ways by sacrificing trust and authentic relationship, right? Because we got to get that gift in under the wire. I've also seen folks that say, okay, I'm going to like totally overhaul my development plan for the next year, and it's going to be all community-centric fundraising, right? But I've been in a relationship with donors for years, and you don't just get to change the rules on someone that you care about without communicating it with them, right? So I like to think of, community-centric fundraising as the opportunity to acknowledge that relationships move at the speed of trust. And if we believe that, then to be in mutual relationship, we have to take time to understand our community, what they want and need, our teams, our staff, our volunteers, what they want and need, and our donors, what they want and need. And then the organization, again, right, going back to that reciprocal generosity, then we have an opportunity to create a space of learning, to create a space of community, to create a space of opportunity that brings people along with us on the change that we're seeking or the vision that we have for our community.
The thing that I think I've always not struggled with per se, but why I'm excited about this conversation is because I can actually talk to somebody who is an authority on these things. I know we're trying to break down hierarchies, of course, but like you've thought a lot about this. And so the thing that I know we've chatted, at least in private, that now it's fun to be able to say in public is that I think we need to take it a little bit further when it comes to the technology side.
Yeah.
Because in a world where agentive artificial intelligence can mimic in many ways the behaviors and even the look, there is like, folks, there is honest to goodness, like full human style robots having conversations in higher education right now with donors, completely taking on that relationship. So this isn't science fiction anymore. This is reality. It's happening. We need to elevate the technology as part of that team and that conversation. The community element now has to have the robot, so to speak, as part of it. And look, we can go back. My father was a sci-fi author. His biggest influence was Isaac Asimov, right? iRobot, right? There is elements where it's like, what is the whole thing about, do you say please and thank you to ChatGPT, and how much does that cost, and all of this type of stuff? Ultimately, it's like, what are the values that we're teaching? And our children are going to grow up in a world where they are directly talking to these things as if they are an extension of the household or the community. So not to get too heavy here, but how do you think about that world? And then we'll end with some touching grass, like food stuff. But
yeah, absolutely. So technology is inescapable. I will say that. I am sure that there were people that were anxious about cars and airplanes and helicopters and the internet, right? And they are tools that we've had to learn to use, that we've made a lot of mistakes using these tools. And I think making mistakes is honestly the best way, how to learn, how to use something to your best advantage. And so for me, AI is a tool like that. I understand how it's being used right now. I don't know that an AI generated entity could or should take the place of a human relationship between a donor and a staff person, or between a staff person and that community. I understand that you can certainly have dialogue, right? That might get you to a certain point. But at this moment in time, you can't have AI take your donor out on a site visit, right? You can't have AI be in conversation with, I'm in St. Louis. We had an F3 tornado just come through this community. You cannot tell me that you're going to send AI to someone's house and explain to them that they're going to have to leave, right? So there are limitations to the technology. And I generally will encourage people to test it out, to see how it might be useful to you. But fundraising, development work is not an easy job. So if you're looking for an easy job, or a job where you get to sort of check boxes off and shut down at the end of the day, like, this isn't that work. And AI is not going to make it that work either.
I've come to the conclusion, I like thinking of it like a bicycle in many ways, right? And if Steve Jobs called it the bicycle for the mind, the computer, right? Maybe we need something for the heart.
Yeah.
And also, bicycles are a lot healthier. And
absolutely,
there's more of a unified way that you can ride and go and swarm in different areas together and stuff like that. So that's that. We'll put that off for another episode, a part 2 perhaps. But
in this analogy, right, you have to put in the energy to make it work for you.
Exactly.
Like, let's have that takeaway.
Exactly.
Right?
That's why I like it, because you need to be part of that. So let's strip out the in some ways the technology side. Let's get back to the basics. Get back to the kind of the feeling of generosity. So my final question for you is ultimately, I find so much of our humanity and generosity can be exemplified by food.
Oh, yeah.
And the ways that we share meals together. So what is a meal that you would share with others that brings that feeling of warmth and generosity that you were hoping others feel?
Okay, so my family is from Goa, India. So that is a lot of the meals that I had growing up was sort of in that cooking tradition. And so one of my comfort foods that my mom used to make for me, when I was like cramming for finals in grad school, was lamb or chicken biryani. So it's this layered sort of meat and rice dish that has curry in it. It usually takes like half a day to make if you're getting the good stuff. And so one of my sort of favorite things to do when like the farmer's market is well stocked is to spend my Saturday collecting up all the ingredients and then cooking like this huge pot of biryani and enjoying it with my kids, or packing some up to share with the neighbors. But that meal, gives me meat and carbs any day, first of all. But that meal specifically, the spices, the flavor, the heartiness of it, like, has always been, it feels like love to me. And so I have received that meal with love, and I offer that meal with love when I have the opportunity to make it.
Well, I hope in the future we can share that meal together.
Yeah. Oh, so, I will cook for you anytime.
Love it.
Anytime.
Love it. And I know the kids will probably not try too much of it, but we will attempt it. Rachel, we are done with our first episode. This is not going to be the last time that we'll hear from you in the Neon One community, but I want to thank you for your time and your generosity in everything. And there's a deep love that I have for you that, just on a personal level.
The love is reciprocal. Thank you for hosting me today.
Look at that. Awesome. Rachel, talk to you soon. We will
Sounds great.
Catch you later.
Bye.
So we've had a really good episode so far. We heard from Abby Jarvis. We just wrapped a fantastic conversation with Rachel D'Souza. And there's something that, before I bring on Sam Nyland, that I wanted to introduce as a recurring segment that I'm personally excited to bring to you. I'm going to call it the generosity spectrum, and it's going to help me kind of help unpack an idea that I've been kicking around for a while now, where ultimately I feel that we can get to a place to better understand the motivations of our donors as we learn more about the role of technology and especially things like artificial intelligence. Where this really clicked in for me is, this journey started when I completed my certificate in philanthropic psychology from the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy a few years ago. And it really rewired my brain under Professor Jen Shang, who I am deeply grateful for, and I hope can eventually be on the podcast. I owe her a lot, and it helped me think differently about what all of this could mean. Because look, there's a lot of incredible tools that Neon One has, things like the generosity indicator, dashboards, automation for workflows. But most systems are going to tell us what people do, not why they do it. And so we're swimming in data, but ultimately we're starved in meaning, right? And so I think this also connects to some of the bigger frustrations that there's been a lot of arguments about, for instance, on LinkedIn, which doesn't represent real life, but it's at least interesting to see what people are talking about. And segmentation in particular, I think, is a pretty constant discussion point. A lot of data shows that retention, for instance, can be very deeply tied to communications, right? Even death. And I know that sounds very jarring to hear, but think about if you have a legacy giving program, are you welcoming people in to participate in that? And ultimately, if they choose not to, that's more than fine. But did you give them the opportunity to leave something, to leave a legacy? And so I think that a lot of our traditional segmentation is just one about transaction history. It's not about the transformational potential of people. And we miss that motivation. We miss that identity, the emotional drivers that ultimately have helped me understand the world of the world, the world much more deeply. And that's honestly where I think that philanthropic psychology can help us here. I do not consider myself an expert. I have a background in history. I want to put a lot of caveats that this is me learning in public with you. But even when we did a community poll, a survey of Neon One folks, this topic actually is one of the top requested things that people want to know about. So we're going to use this to unpack what love, identity, and psychological well-being do to drive generosity, to drive giving, advocacy, volunteerism. And when people feel more connected to their best selves, they give more and with greater joy. Like the data's there, but that's not what we talk about. So we're going to explore this. We're going to unpack this in a segment called the generosity spectrum. And I'm going to take about 5 minutes a month to just think through this and think about how this applies to archetypes and behavior and segmentation and generosity experience journey design and overall the future of giving. So think of this as your monthly check-in for understanding donors more deeply and loving them more fully. And this isn't just for fundraisers. This is actually going to be something that anybody who wants to make generosity more human is going to benefit from. So I'm excited. I hope you'll join me for this journey. And we're just getting started. We're going to kick over into hearing from Sam Nyland in just a minute, but I'm very excited to explore the generosity spectrum with you. So that is almost a wrap for our pilot episode of the generosity experience. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We are actually going to kick off a special segment starting next episode called the Nonprofit Hotline. And that's where I'm going to have my co-host, Sam Nyland. Sam Nyland, say hello.
Hi, everyone.
So Sam and I are going to kind of do a riff at the end here, and you're going to hear from you. So this is where we're going to encourage you. So every month, we're going to every episode, we're going to go through and read some of the questions that you have, the issues that you're working through when it comes to the intersections of generosity and technology. So you have two experts we can call on our larger network as well, but we'd want to hear from you. And so we'll be opening up the mailbag starting this episode, Sam. So what are you hoping that people actually might ask you about? Because, you've been in the nonprofit space a bit. Why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners who might not know who you are, actually?
Yeah, my name is Sam Nyland. I am a product marketing manager here at Neon One. And I've been with Neon One for quite some time, just like Tim, having various roles within the company, but always staying focused primarily on Neon One and the product at hand. So I am co-host of this podcast to talk specifically about how we can help organizations, users of Neon One technology, build community and build generosity. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm hoping we have some fun questions about the tech itself. And not just how to raise donations and things like that, but to really track how we can track generosity and track time and things like that. So
we want to nerd out. We want to nerd out a bit because, Sam, you didn't give our relationship enough credit, in my opinion.
I didn't.
Can you give the listeners? Let's go back a little bit before Neon, because life does exist before the technology company.
It does.
So Sam, where did we actually meet? Just for a little bit of biography. We will not usually riff this long, folks.
Yes.
But I think it's important for you to get comfortable with me and Sam. So Sam, how did we get to know each other, actually?
So Tim and I met in Chicago, where we both lived, at an organization called Arts of Life. And Tim was I believe your title was development manager.
Outreach coordinator. But I did a lot. I did do development and stuff like that. Yeah.
So I actually started volunteering there and interned basically with Tim. I had graduated college in 2008, and as we know, that was a big boom. So I was working at a bar, I was babysitting, I was needing to fulfill my time with something a little bit more meaningful. And I was scouring the internet for awesome nonprofit organizations that I felt a true connection with. And I found Arts of Life, and that led me to Tim. So,
yeah. And what's wild is I learned that our new national partner manager, Colleen, worked at L'Arche, Chicago.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. She actually sent me paper, artwork from Jean Marie. Remember Jean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she has like a Gene Wolfe thing. I know, right? Like,
that's
this is wild. And this is the thing, folks. You never know where generosity is going to take you. And so we're not talking about just technology. We're talking about building meaningful community. So Sam, who are we going to be hearing from in your episode in just 2 weeks?
Yeah, so I'm going to be interviewing and talking with Eric Guzman from Together for Youth. And we are going to, he's a awesome guy, and we are going to learn about how he builds community within his organization. They just rebranded their name. I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about that. But excited to understand how he uses Neon One technology for all his administrative stuff and fundraising efforts, but also to dive deeper into how he's building those meaningful relationships with his constituents and also just his internal staff.
I think ultimately, folks, if you're listening in, obviously for the first time in our pilot episode, takeaways every month, we're going to show you the magic of generosity. It happens through experiences. It happens through things, but ultimately we're trying to build the zone of trust, and you have to have everybody on the same team there. There's staff like Eric. You need partners like us in terms of the technology, and then obviously your larger supporter community, and that's why we heard from Abby. And so all of this is connected. We're so excited. Want to thank you for listening in on this first episode. Sam, we'll hear from you in 2 weeks.
Sounds good. Excited.
Okay. Have a great day, folks. Get on out there and let's go make some good happen. Thanks for listening to the Generosity Experience. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We'll see you in 2 weeks.